Hi, good evening, everyone. Uh, Thank you for joining our workshop today. So, uh, Before I start, let me briefly introduce about Mind Story. My name is Charlie. I'm a counselor for the Mind Story. Okay, so about us, our team consists of multiple disciplinary, meaning that we have different types of therapies, and we provide services to children that have academic delays, sensory delays, developmental delays, behavioral and emotional difficulties, and physical delays. Like I said, our team consists of multiple disciplinary, so we have different types of health professional teachers working together. So we have academic support, behavior therapists, clinical psychologists, counseling, occupational therapists, reading therapists, as well as physiotherapists. Okay, so you can contact us or WhatsApp us at this is our phone number, or you can drop us an email. And our working operation hours is Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. We open on Saturday and Sunday as well, but prior for appointment only. And we are closed during public holidays. Okay, you can check us out at our Facebook page, our website, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Okay, so today we're going to talk about something uh, that it's been a while. I mean, it's a topic that we feedback. I got a feedback about this topic last year, where I met a lot of parents facing such difficulties. So it's called specific learning disorder. So today, this topic will invite our in-house clinical psychologist, Miss Liana, to talk about specific learning disorder and to understand what actually is a specific learning disorder. Hi, Miss Liana, are you there?
Hi, Charlie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So for those parents, if you have any question, feel free to put it in the comment box so we can bring it up to Miss Liana to answer any questions regarding specific learning disorder. All right. Do you want to start, Miss Liana?
All right, sure. Let me just share my screen. Give me a moment. Can you see my screen, Charlie?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right. So today, what we're going to do today is I'm going to share a little bit of information about specific learning disability or specific learning disorders. This is what we call SLD. Probably not many people are aware of SLDs. Probably most of the people or teachers are more aware with the term of dyslexia. All right. So not many people are aware of the term of SLD. So basically, SLD is the umbrella of the dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. So I will be sharing a little bit of information about all those changes, which is the dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia into further. But before that, we'll just go on a brief general knowledge on how what is SLD beforehand.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, just a comment from me. Uh, why some of the parents did ask me, or why do I need to speak to a clinical psychologist other than doctor or a psychiatrist? So yeah, normally doctors, clinical psychologists, or psychiatrists are the first person you talk to when the teachers at your school or at your child's school talk about SLD or specific learning disability. Why? Because clinical psychologists, doctors, pediatricians, psychiatrists, they are the one to do diagnosis, and then they have the tools to like draw a basic outline to understand or to provide an understanding to parents exactly what is specific learning disorder. So teachers at school might experience children with specific learning disability, but if you want confirmation, that's the reason why we bring in a clinical psychologist to talk about this because they provide diagnosis. And then another fun fact about specific learning disability that I learned is, well, this is just for fun, yeah, but it's real. Specific learning disability only occurs in learning environment. So if hence the name specific learning disability. So if your child is not in a learning setting, then you will not see any specific learning disability. So this is normally happen when a child transition from play, which is the age of 3 to 4, and then when they transition to preschool, and then to kindergarten, and then to primary school, and then and so forth. So this is where learning occurs. That's where you can see if a child has specific learning disability. All right, pass it to you, Miss Liana. So that's the fun fact. I think it's good to learn about this.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, so we're gonna talk a little bit on general on what is SLD. All right. So what is specific learning disability, or what is SLD? So basically, SLD refers to the deficit that impacts the academic achievement. Like what Charlie mentioned, it only affects on children who have difficulty in learning. All right. So when we talk about academic achievement, it does not only referring to only one part or one phase of education. It occurs in all levels of education. So Charlie mentioned just now, we can see within the preschool, and then primary school, secondary school, and tertiary school, tertiary education, which is the university or college. So yeah, so it has to have the similarity of the difficulty or the struggles. So it could not happen to only one phase. For example, if your child is doing good in primary school, primary education, and then your child is having difficulty adapting or difficulty understanding syllabus or content from the secondary school, that does not mean that your child has learning disability, probably learning difficulties, probably in terms of understanding, but not learning disability. Why? Because learning disability is a clinical diagnosis, so it has to be a prominent diagnosis to have been diagnosed with specific learning disability or SLD. So just because your child is having difficulties understanding certain things, does not put them under the learning disability, because it has to be prominent throughout their education levels of education. All right. So then again, that's why it has a major impact on academic achievement, because it has difficulties in terms of their learning abilities. So we're going to talk a little bit further in what their impacts on later on. All right. So learning disability, or people might say, call it a learning disorder, is a general term for neurological disorder that affects a child's brain. So basically, SLDs is under the neurodevelopmental disorders. All right. So when we talk about neurodevelopmental disorders, it is regarding to the brain function. So during the learning phase of a child, so getting information, receiving information, processing, retaining information. So those are all being done not only on a daily basis, but especially when you are learning something. So whatever the teacher has to talk to you or say, teaching about a syllabus, you need to receive those information, and you need to process information and retain into your long-term memory or short-term memory, and then you need to respond to it. All right. So if the child has difficulty, especially with specific learning disabilities, most child would have difficulty in terms of doing that. Probably in the first phase of receiving information, not understanding what is being read, not understanding what is being said, right? So that is probably the first step of the first step of having difficulties in terms of learning, right? Receiving itself. All right. The next step is processing those information. With children with SLD have difficulty processing in terms of understanding and relating from one information to the other. So that is the processing information that is having most children would have difficulties in terms of that. And then retaining would be under the terms of memory aspect. So if your child have difficulty in terms of memorizing certain things or understanding certain things to keep it into the memory section, so it will be impacting in their academic achievement. So, and then in how to respond, for example, if you teach them one thing, and how can they say it back, how can they explain back certain things? So that is also how they respond to certain information. If they can take it in but can't actually explain it back, there's input but there's no output, or difficulty to have output, that is also a certain thing, a thing that we need to look at. So it has to be receiving, processing, retaining, responding to information. So that is all those process in terms of learning process to have be achieved at a certain point.
Yeah, that's very good. So I'm not sure if everyone heard, but Miss Liana did share one of the biggest or one of the most obvious differences between learning difficulties and learning disability is it has to be consistent from the onset or the beginning of learning. There is constantly deficit or constantly academic performance, let's say that's the most obvious one, constantly this particular subject constantly having a low performance from uh, as young as kindergarten towards primary school. So it's very consistent. Whereas learning difficulties, it can be the child have attention difficulties. The child might speak more than one languages, or the child have difficulty understanding. But when we talk about learning disability, is like what Ms. Liana have shared, the whole entire process of learning is impact or it's affected because of this particular specific disability that's involved in learning, hence the name specific learning disability. So parents out there or teachers out there, please do not get panic and don't just jump straight to the gun saying that, oh, your child might have SLD. So normally, like what Ms. Liana shared, they will check the child. It's a clinical term. So it's not a term that we can throw around without proper evidence-based or proper assessment or proper diagnosis. So we don't want parents to get panic, when you said, oh, your child has disability in learning. So it's a big thing. And we will that's why the person that to look for is like doctors and clinical psychologists, so they can screen. Most of the time, it can be just specific difficulties, but it can be SLD. So it's very close to each other, but there's a very obvious outline way, like what Ms. Liana has outlined. The differences is it can be consistent, like throughout kindergarten years, consistently English has difficulty. So we can assume, but it's not confirmed. Okay, you can suspect, you can outline, but it's not confirmed until it has been assessed. So yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Okay, let's move on to the. So remember when I said just now that so learning disabilities is a general term for neurological disorders. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain briefly on neurodevelopmental disorders. So neurodevelopmental disorders are disabilities associated with the brain function or the neurological system. All right. So when I say neurological, it refers to the brain function. If there is a difficulty or affecting the brain function, then there is under neurodevelopmental disorders. So that will be having difficulties in terms of their daily functions. All right. So not only in terms of learning disabilities, but other function as well. So there are other types of disorders or difficulties in terms of under the neurodevelopmental disorders. For example, here is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is the ADHD, as most know the ADHD, and autism, or the autism spectrum disorder, which is the ASD, learning disabilities, which is the SLD, intellectual disabilities, which is the ID, conduct disorders, that will be under behavioral, cerebral palsy, impairment in vision and hearing. All right, so not necessarily people with children with neurodevelopmental disorders would not have to go through all this. So this is all just examples of under the neurodevelopmental disorders, which has something got to do with their brain function. So if they have difficulties in terms of this, it means that they need to be given specific attention for them to learn or to deal with their daily routines differently, because it's not something that they are doing it for fun, or they're not doing it for the sake of wanting attention, but they have difficulties within their brain or neurological system that makes them do certain things. So we need to identify which difficulties that they are facing, and we need to help them in the right way instead of ignoring, instead of punishing, you know. So they will have difficulties in terms of behavior wise, understanding, you know, other things especially. So we need to learn and understand them before we make the judgment that person or that child is being mischievous, that child is doing things because of they want attention. So we need to identify and help them because they need the help to function or adapt to the normal society, because it is difficult for them because it has got to do with their brain function. All right. And then second one, children with neurodevelopmental disorders can experience difficulties, like I said just now, in language and speech, motor skills, behavior, memory, learning, and other neurological functions, because all of these are related to the brain function. So when there are difficulties or impacting their brain function, they would have difficulties in certain areas. So when there are difficulties in certain areas, so we need to identify and accommodate them to actually have a better or proper settings for them to learn. Not that they cannot learn, but sometimes they need a special way or a new strategy for them to actually undergo learning experience differently from other or typical children. All right. So neurodevelopment, when we talk about neurodevelopmental, it usually is hereditary. Means that it can comes from the gene itself. So learning disabilities can come from genes or heredity. If one of your family members is being diagnosed with SLD or any other neurodevelopmental disorders, then there is a possibility for other family members to have them as well. Sometimes it is difficult for us to tell whether that person has SLD or other neurodevelopmental disorders, because in the past, these are not being put forward and they are not being given enough attention. Most probably, if children who have SLD in the past, they would categorize them as being lazy, as being ignorant, you know, things like that. So all the negative connotations are being given, but actually that person might actually have learning disabilities to actually learn, to have difficulties in terms of trying hard to actually learn how other children learn, probably is being difficult. And you know, when they have trouble learning, like most children do, they would act up on their behavior, not wanting to learn, not getting the interest. Probably they like what they learn in class, but because of they don't know or don't understand what's being given, what's being taught in the class, it's difficult for them to actually just stay still and just focus on the whiteboard or on the teachers. Sometimes they would just move around, you know, not because you don't understand, so but why bother listening, isn't it? So probably they would disturb their friends, you know, do their own things and whatnot. So yeah, so that's why sometimes it's difficult to identify learning disabilities in the past or other neurodevelopmental disorders, because it was not being given attention as what it's supposed to. All right, so how does neurodevelopmental disorders happen? It could probably happen during pregnancy or birth, such as drugs and alcohol use. It could impact the child during the pregnancy due to, let's say, traumatic fall, traumatic injury, during, like say, for example, during the labor itself. If the child is cut off from the oxygen for more than 4 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, the child might have difficulty or have brain issues, which could lead to intellectual disabilities or learning disabilities or any other disabilities that I just mentioned just now. So there is a possibility for that to happen during the pregnancy, during birth. That is how it happens. So it does not happen after you go to a certain level of education and it's difficult for you to take in, and then suddenly you have learning disabilities. No, it does not happen that way, because if it's under neurodevelopmental disorders, it has got to do with the brain function and from birth. It can also, neurodevelopmental disorder can also develop when a person is or a child is older, but having to go through a traumatic accident that would lead to traumatic concussion, a hard fall on the head that would lead to any traumatic brain injury, So that would also might lead to the neurodevelopmental disorder as well if the brain is having a great impact or traumatic impact on it. Yeah. Aside from that, neurodevelopmental disorders usually happen during birth or pregnancy. All right. So let's talk about the characteristics. Now that we know that SLD is under the neurological neurodevelopmental disorders, let's talk about the characteristics of SLD. So just now we mentioned a little bit of SLDs having difficulty in terms of their academic achievement. So let's look at one by one. When we talk about learning, there's always something got to do with reading. Definitely you have to start with reading, understanding alphabets, and then understanding the syllables, how to make up one syllable to one syllable, and basically after that is how to read. So children with SLD might have difficulty in reading, such as inaccurate reading or inaccurate pronunciation. Their phonics is inaccurate. So when they hear certain words, they want to say it differently. For example, people would say panas, hot, for example, panas, but the child will say napas, right? Can be that way because their difficulty in terms of reading and coming out with the phonics is difficult. So, and also they will go slow and with much effort in terms of reading. For example, just coming out with the phonics itself, b, ch, k, d itself, sometimes it's difficult for them because of the brain function has different sound. Probably they hear it differently or they make the words differently. So that would be difficult for them to read. So like say, for example, when reading between the B and D, sometimes they mistake the B and D, the sounds of the B and D. So instead of saying bacha, they will say dacha probably, and that would be inaccurate for them to actually read, and that does not make sense. What is dacha? All right. So that is one of the things that makes it difficult for them to read because of the difficulty that they're having. Next one is the difficulty understanding the meaning of what is read. All right. So some children can read probably with effort, but they can read. All right. But understanding the meaning of what they read is something is a problem for them itself. So let's say, for example, they learn how to read. Saya suka baca buku. So if they learn how to read that, but do they understand what is saya suka baca buku? All right. So probably they only know certain meanings, but having to put everything up together in a sentence, probably they have difficulties understanding them. Right. So that is one of the characteristics of SLD. And then next one is spelling. So like I said, when you have difficulty with phonics, you have difficulty in terms of doing or writing certain letters. That would be spelling, coming out with the words, with the phonics of how to spell. Let's say, for example, kucing, ku-ch-ing. All right. So with that, if you have difficulty with the phonics itself, when you hear the kucing word, but you have difficulty with writing them down because you understand it differently. So that's why sometimes spelling is difficult. Sometimes you're missing a word, letters, alphabets. Sometimes you spelling it, you put the right word, like say Kucing, but you put it Kcnig, things like that. So the words can be mixed up in those spelling. And then difficulty in written expression. So when as they grow up, as during their primary, especially standard 4, standard 5, standard 6 in the mainstream school, they would have to learn how to make essays, how to read long sentences, right? So in terms of SLD, when children who have SLD, written expression is difficult for them. For example, grammar, punctuation, or organization. They might lose certain words. For example, they want to say, I want to go to the toilet. Let's say that's what the sentences he's supposed to write. So instead of writing down, I want to go to the toilet, probably the missing word would be I go toilet or I toilet. All right. So it's not a proper sentence. And that's where they have difficulty. Like, yeah, this is what I meant. I want to go to the toilet, but this is what I wrote. This is I go toilet or things like that. So having it to express in written formation is very difficult. Sometimes they have the ideas, but not knowing how to elaborate further on how to write those sentences, that can be difficult as well.
Yeah, I would like to share an experience.
Right.
Difficult reading and difficult understanding. This is something that I see quite common last year, where I've seen parents brought the child in. Those who are familiar with uh, the book, something Jane, I forgot what's the full name. They can read book one, book two, book three. But when they were asked about the questions, like, so what do you understand from the passage? Then they somewhat couldn't understand. And then some don't even realize the book has changed because Peter and Jane, sorry, that's the book. And because they are so used to reading the same book, when you change, they'll read it as it is without knowing that actually that's not the right text. So this show that this particular child has inaccurate of reading as well as don't understand the passage what is read, and obviously they have difficulties spelling. So this is some of the few common when come to reading that I personally experienced because it's really um, fascinating to see like how did the child cope with school because he was given a different text, but he will read confidently. He's like reading, the child is reading off the book, but if the book has been swapped out, I purposely changed the book or the parents changed the book, but the child is still continuously reading, but every text is wrong. And then we can see that consistently at school for the past 3 to 4 years, uh, the child only able to perform in listening task or ujian lisan. Writing, not at all. So this is where the parents suspect about, I mean, the school started to suspect about SLD because of this characteristic. So I'm not saying that the child has SLD. I'm not sure if they have been tested, but these are some of the experience that I can share and witness, which I mean, it's good that I can share with everyone because it is really amazing. I was interested in how did this child able to cope for the past 10 years old. So that's 4 years of primary school, 2 years of kindergarten. So it took us 6 years to realize that this child has difficulty in reading because I just assumed that this child learn reading because of continuously listening to someone else reading the book. So I assume that it's how this particular child learns. So yeah.
Right. Thank you, Charlie, for sharing. Yeah, that is one of the difficulties as well. Sometimes they read, sometimes they actually have those memory of reading certain text, but not being aware that the text has been changed. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the next point, which is the difficulty understanding number concepts, number facts, or calculation. All right. So under the characteristic of SLD, some children may have difficulties in number concepts. So, like say for example, if you teach a lot of times like 3 + 5 is 8, for example, but then when you change it to 5 + 3 is 8, sometimes they have difficulty understanding like why is 5 + 3, you say that is 3 + 5. So that is one of the things that may have confusion with children who have SLD. And sometimes when you teach mathematical concepts, they have difficulty. One is understanding. Second is if they understand, if they know how to do, sometimes they forget the next day. So that is something that probably they just do memorize it, but not understanding. Sometimes when I do assessment, informal assessment with children, do you know why this minus this is this or this plus this is this, while doing with a matchstick thing. So sometimes they have difficulties. That is one of the things that I look for, understanding concepts. So sometimes I just switch up the numbers, but with the same calculation, they have difficulty as well. So not understanding how to do not understanding the concept, how the number concept works, and difficulty doing the calculation as well. All right. And then last one is difficulty with mathematical reasoning, applying math concepts or solving math problems. This usually we could say for the subjective papers. So for math, we know that we have paper objective and subjective. So the objective papers is the multiple question choices, right? The MQs, multiple choice question, MCQ. And then the subjective paper is more to reading, understanding the context, the text, and also applying your mathematical concepts that you understand or formulation that you understand. So this could be seen in the paper 2 mathematics. So reading itself, the reading the paragraph or the problem itself is one thing. Applying the mathematical reasoning is one thing, and how to solve those problems is another. So we have a lot of skills for the children to apply in just one question. So if children with SLD having difficulty with let's just say one of the characteristics, which is reading. So if they have difficulty in reading, how would they understand what the question wants them to do, right? If they can read, but they don't understand the mathematical reasoning, not knowing how to solve this problem, so that will be an impact to them as well. All right. And then next one is persistent difficulty during formal years of schooling. All right, so just now, Charlie did mention about having to go through schooling years, and then that's where you can identify those issues, right? So this is what I want to highlight. It has to be formal years of schooling. If kindergarten, sometimes with the kindergarten itself, they only do most of the time they use play school, playing time or circle time a lot more than they do teaching academics. So that is not considered as formal education. So they have to go through formal education. Like say if they pre-kindergarten, preschool classes have formal teachings in terms of knowing how to read, knowing how to know their alphabets and numbers, going through step by steps on how to read and whatnot, how to do mathematics, so how to write things. So if they have gone through all that before going to primary school and still have the difficulties, then probably yes, we can go see and we can see whether if the child is having difficulties during their preschool. But sometimes I do have this issues with parents when I ask, when they say that, oh, I send my child to kindergarten and they do academic teaching. Okay, do you know what do they do when they say academic teaching? Do they do they teach reading? Do they teach phonics? Do they teach how to do mathematics? Most of the time, parents are not aware what the school does. Uh, most of the time they would say like, yeah, I think so, because they say that they have that. But I need a proof and evidence that the school actually do that before I could actually decide whether I want to do for assessment to rule out the SLD characteristics. So if the school or the kindergarten has not yet touched on the formal years of education, so I would have the parents to give me some time for me to teach the child in my session to identify whether if the child understands what I'm teaching. If not, after several sessions, the child has difficulty retaining information, memorizing information, and difficulty respond to those information, then probably they have. But I would still want the parent to wait for formal years of schooling, because what I'm doing is not formal education. I'm just doing simple teaching, and that this could not be the pinpoint of, yeah, just because your child does not understand how I teach, that means your child has SLD. So I can't do that. So if he has difficulty, I would say wait for at least 3 to 6 months in mainstream school and see how the child does in school, because those are the formal years of schooling. If your preschool is not doing the formal education learning, all right? So parents out there, if you're listening, teachers also, if you are listening and want to understand whether the child has difficulties in have the characteristics of SLD, make sure that they have to go through formal years of schooling or formal education system or techniques, and to understand what is being taught in the school so that you know your progress of the children. All right.
Yes. So this is also I personally experienced by having, if the child attend a formal school, then by referring to the syllabus, we can quickly, the process is faster in terms of like assessing the child because we can see that if consistently, let's say mathematics, in terms of counting, additional, subtraction, then if the syllabus was taught in a way that we can track, oh, so the performance started when introducing addition, and then by year one, year two, year three, or primary one, primary two, primary three is quite consistent in that particular subject, then the clinical psychologists are able to identify. Because nowadays there's different types of education available outside homeschooling, um, regardless what type of education, as long as there's a syllabus and we can identify uh, it goes hand in hand with the syllabus and as well as the performance. It's not performance drop, but more of like a consistently performance is not on par or subpar or below the expectation. Then from there we can roughly identify this child at this particular syllabus or at this chapter, because like mathematics is a lot of repetition from the day they started to introduce addition or subtraction. It's just that the numbers get bigger. So then we can identify faster. Same goes to English and Bahasa where, you know, the onset of spelling or matching words or combining words into sentences, that's where it can be faster. So uh, like I said, last year, because of MCO, a lot of parents start to work from home and they have to do the homework with kids. So it's not that there's a rise in learning difficulty, but it's detected earlier, way earlier, because parents start to observe a child. Okay, and then same goes to teachers at school where they're able to see one by one when they do online this, and because some teachers require the child to, live putting in the answers into the Google form and things like that, so they can see that oh, this child is quite consistent in certain subject that they have difficulty. So yeah, so uh, it has the characteristic of SLD, but we don't jump straight saying that the person have a SLD. But it's good that it's like what Miss Liana mentioned. It's important for parents and teachers to observe in which particular area or which particular chapter the child has performed poorly, and also we can track because SLD is not something because it's part of a neurodevelopmental disorder or disability. So it don't take one day to develop. It take quite some time uh, before you can like understand what is actually going on. So yeah, that's from me.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Yeah, so Charlie actually mentioned the next point, which is the academic performance below the average range, right? So when you want to identify children who has SLD, one thing if you see at their academic performance is always below the average range, regardless whether it's reading, writing, or mathematics. So below average range, not just like say for example the average range is 50, probably around 52, 53, not just that, probably the child may have difficulty in terms of passing the subject and whatnot, or understanding things like that. So it has to be the academic performance, it has to be below the average range of the test that is required for the children. So that's one of the things that we need to look at it for consistency. So if the child comes in, the parents comes in saying that, okay, my child is having poor academic performance. Okay, so let's look at their academic achievement. So how is it? And if the parents think that, oh yeah, because of last year's MCO, my child is dropping from this range to this range. Okay, so what about previously before MCO happens? What do you think happens to the academic performance? Oh, my child actually can perform very well for this subject because having to go to schools and whatnot. So that itself is not the consistency. All right. Just because your child is having difficulty during the MCO period does not necessarily means that your child has the characteristics of SLD. So this is one thing that I would like to highlight as well. Because of the MCO, I know everyone has difficulty facing with the MCO period, not only for the children, for the parents as well, working at home with all the responsibilities and duties and whatnot. It can be chaotic. So it can be chaotic for the children itself. Learning from home or PDPR or online sessions, it can be difficult for them. Why? Because there's a lot of distractions. Let's say if you have you put that your child with least amount of distraction, let's say in the room itself. So basically, I would say that inside the room has a lot of distractions. You have the bed, you have, let's say if there's a pet in the room, let's say if there's a lot of things, a lot of books, other books, games, things like that. So there's a lot of distractions at home itself, even in one room. Moreover, for those who have a lot of siblings, like for example, siblings running around, siblings crying. So the child also have difficulty focusing on the screen itself. Why? Because there's no direct interaction from the teachers. The teachers have to monitor all those small pieces on the screen to make sure that they're looking. So the teachers might have overlooked certain things, or the teachers might have difficulty getting around with all those children. Some children make noises, things like that. So children also have difficulties performing during the MCO period. But just because they have difficulties in terms of during the MCO period does not mean that they have the characteristics of SLD. So during the MCO, you need to really look at how your child is learning. So if you're there sitting beside your child, probably that is one of the stressors as well. The child have to make sure that they have to focus, but also at the same time scared that you're just there. You ask them like, but you understand, can you answer this? That puts a lot of pressure as compared to being in school. There's no pressure, direct pressure in school or physical classes, because that you as a norm you need to focus on the teacher, and the teacher can directly see if you're not paying attention and whatnot. But all this has been happening, and then a lot of distractions, a lot of factors that can contribute to learning difficulties in children during this MCO period. So just take home note that not just because your child is having difficulty during this MCO period does not mean that your children have characteristics of SLTs. All right, another last one. Most of the time, or on the severe level of the SLD, children would have confusion about directions, time, and time as well. So, like say for example, they're confused between the left and right, up and down, yesterday, tomorrow. So those are all the things that can be difficulty. Like say for example, oh, what you had yesterday? Oh, tomorrow I'm gonna have this. So when we ask about the day before, but their assumption of the day before is actually tomorrow, hot and cold, in and out, things like that. So I want to go in, but actually they say that I want to go out. So that depends on the level of severity. And sometimes this confusion can be seen in their mirror image alphabets or numbers. So they're confused between the left and right, so not sure where the B is on the right side or the D is on the left side, or vice versa. The P's and Q's, the S. So they have difficulty because of the confusion that they have. So these are characteristics of SLTs that I mentioned. All right. Okay. And lastly, learning difficulties are not due to other conditions such as intellectual disability, vision, hearing problems, neurological conditions, conditions such as economic or environmental disadvantage, like I mentioned just now during the MCO period. So that is what we call environmental disadvantage. So there's a lot of disadvantage for the children in terms of focusing on one screen and having the siblings running around, noises here and there, external distractions and whatnot. So if that is the cause of it, then it's not their characteristics of SLD. So you need to make sure that if to rule out SLD, it has to be purely because of academic issues, not other conditions. All right. Lack of instruction, difficulty speaking or understanding of the language. So if, let's say, for example, English. So if your child has other mother tongue language, for example, Chinese or Tamil or Malay, but you're trying to teach English. So not understanding that language and have difficulty or scoring poorly on that subject itself does not mean that your child has characteristics of SLD. Probably it's just because of difficulty on understanding or not enough exposure to that language itself. Right? So we need to rule out all this just to make sure that we are online or in line with the characteristic of SLD alone and not other factors that may affect the characteristics of SLD or the academic achievement itself. All right, so now we're going, after we learn about the characteristics of SLD, so let's talk about the specific, the types of the SLDs. So we have three types of SLDs. So this is, like I said, the SLD is the umbrella. So under the umbrella of SLD, we have dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. All right. So like I said in the beginning of the introduction just now, most people are more aware of the term dyslexia rather than dyscalculia or dysgraphia. So we're going to look at one by one and see what's the difference. Okay, so dyslexia. Dyslexia is focusing on the difficulty acquiring a processing language, right? Lack of proficiency in reading, spelling, writing. So like I said just now, so having difficulty of reading, spelling, and writing, understanding what is being written there may have inclined towards the dyslexia characteristics. So dyslexia, children with dyslexia also may have poor coordination in terms of balancing. Sometimes children can have clumsy moments where they fall without any obstacles and whatnot. So that's poor coordination. And then poor fine motor control, so which is the we would mostly see in terms of how they hold their pencil, their grip of the pencil, and how they want to shape their S, how they want to shape their B's, the C's, all that requires the fine motor control, right? And also poor hand-eye coordination. So hand-eye coordination is very important. If let's say in learning situation, you would want to copy what was written on the whiteboard and you have to write it on your paper. So if you have confusion between left and right, so once you have a look at the whiteboard and then when you want to write, so the B turns into a D because you're confused between the left and right. So that can be an issue as well. And that can lead to the dyslexia rather than other dyscalculia and then dysgraphia. And then most of the time, children with dyslexia or children who have SLD's characteristics, they would avoid trying activities involving reading, especially for dyslexia, it's involving reading. So why? Because when they have difficulty reading, a lot of effort has to be put in there. Children has low patience in terms of reading or doing things that they don't like. So when they have to use more effort in terms of doing it, they're going to feel bored, they're going to be restless, they're going to, they can't sit still because they're already not interested in what they're doing because it's really difficult for them to get it right. It's always getting wrong. So they have difficulty in terms of doing. So they might avoid from reading. So whenever okay, there's pencil and paper, okay, I'm not going to do that. Oh, I'm going to make a lot of excuses, things like that. And sometimes they prefer using other mediums such as pictures, videos, or audio learning materials for them to actually grasp or understand better in terms of that. So it depends on the child itself whether they are which one they prefer or which one they can use best to improve their learning abilities. All right, and then okay, last thing is the misconception that all children with dyslexia write letters backwards. Like I said, the mirror image is the letter backwards. All right, so the B's is the D's and the D's is the B's, the P's and Q's, the S on the other side. So that is what we call mirror image. So not all children with dyslexia have mirror image issues, and not everyone who writes letters backwards have dyslexia. So that's one thing that we need to understand. So once if you see that your child is writing in a mirror image, that does not mean that your child has dyslexia, because dyslexia or SLD characteristics has a lot of characteristics that we discussed just now. So that is not the main character that we look for in dyslexia.
Correct. I agree because I personally see as well a lot of parents, they get panic, or teachers come to me, it's like, oh, this child, they write 6 and 9 invertedly, like, or interchangeably, 6 and 9, or B and D, capital E and 3 is uh, 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 on the wrong side, or putting on shoes from left to right. So they start saying, oh, my child has, I suspect my child has dyslexia. This is the common misconception. In order for child to be diagnosed with dyslexia, there's a lot of criteria that a child need to be met, like need to meet before is in dyslexia. So sometimes what I have encountered with parents is it can be a simple visual perception whereby the child are unable to distinguish yet, because some design of the shoes, it doesn't have the like very obvious design where the left side the shoes is inverted in on the inner side, and it's like the shape of the shoes is pointing inwards, so that to indicate you that this one is left side or this one right side. So if you look at some of the shoes that have a very big end, the top end, so basically it's like like McDonald's shoes where it's huge. You if you see it from the top, it can be the child mistakenly uh, put it on, or some visual perception. So what we see doesn't translate very well in the head. So hence they have put it wrongly. Some we have with child writing, maybe they are learning languages. I've seen some children who speak multiple languages, or bilingual, or more than 2 languages. So sometimes when they pronounce the words, when they spell, you get confused between the B and the D sound. So sometimes they read it as a B, they spell it with a B, but actually it's a D. So there's a lot of things that we need to screen before we say that. Yes, in dyslexia, the most common characteristic is writing words backward, or mirror image. But that doesn't mean that if you have this, means that you have dyslexia. It has to do with vision and other factors that we have to filter before we say that the child has dyslexia. And also sometimes, if you notice, some of the words we see in computer typing, especially the G, when you write G on a computer, is very different from how we write on a paper. So sometimes we write on a paper, the ending is like there's an opening end. But if you write it on a computer, the G has a very small tiny gap. So sometimes the child might mistake it as 8, but it's a lowercase g, if you notice this in writing. Same goes to car plate number. I have parents who come to me saying that, my child read the car plate differently. Okay, so then we found out that actually he was looking at the car plate from the side mirror or the back mirror, where the number or the alphabet will be project mirror. Okay, because he see not directly in front of the car plate number is from a mirror, so definitely the word's going to be mirrored. And then also, if you notice the alphabet on, it's all the font that we learn. If you look at the couplet numbers, okay, it's, what do you call this? The Q that they have in lowercase, the 9 is almost like the G that we write on a paper. So with a curly tail, okay, curl to the left when you write 9. But when we write, okay, it's straight. So that's the couplet, or like it's almost like a couplet of lowercase q. So these are the factors that it might uh, uh, might be a reason for a child while they see or sometimes perceive things differently. So yeah.
Right, thank you for sharing. That is very interesting, Charlie.
You're
So
welcome.
yeah, so that is something that is one of the factors that can affect a child's learning. So that's why we need to help the children when, especially when they started to learning, we need to identify what are the issues. If they have confused within the left and right, probably it's just a face, all right? So make sure they know a repetition of instructions, of knowing the left and right, to do properly, to be aware of things. So that is also important. Sometimes our children, they want to do things very fast. They just simply put on shoes and just run out, or just put on clothes, whether it's in and out or out and in. So they don't care. They just want to go out and settle things. So that does not mean that the children has difficulties on knowing or confusing about the left and right thing. So it also depends on the situation itself.
Yeah, and one more that I would like to share is I've seen this with a child attending occupational therapy as well, OT, where the child has poor bilateral functioning. So meaning that the awareness of half of the body is not properly developed. So the child has difficulty identifying left and right.
Right.
And also when they write, the visual perception, they tend to write from the middle instead of from the start here. So they do have difficulty the way they perceive visually. It can be sometimes like what the OT may say, that it can be the spatial or the awareness of the body parts, the movement, or what they call a proprioceptor. So this is where, you know, the awareness of the body or the bilateral functioning, the other half of the body, they did interact very well. And Liana, we have a question. If my son have difficulty in reading Malay storybook and always recognize B as D and vice versa, this alone does not categorize him as dyslexia?
Yes. So if the other characteristics that we discussed just now is not present, and just the B and D's probably is just a face, so we need to dig further into that. So not necessarily with a character with dyslexia, but I dare not say that it's not dyslexia as well. So we need to get that check as well. Yeah.
Yeah. For parents that ask us this question, it's better that we can clarify with the teacher to see other writing, and also especially this reading in Malay storybook. So you might want to ask the teacher if he has any other quite consistent situation, similar situation, when he do reading or writing. Okay, and then you can see whether it's you can talk to the teacher if it's quite consistent, and you might want to check with a clinical psychologist, or you can look at the characteristic that Diana has shared. Okay, or another one that you might want to talk to the teachers, because they might have experience working with children, or write or read alphabet in a mirrored way. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so that's a little bit about dyslexia. So let's move on to dyscalculia. So a lot of people are not aware of the term dyscalculia, only dyslexia, or most of the time only dyslexias, right? So dyscalculia is also under the umbrella of SLD. So this dyscalculia is more referring to difficulties learning numbers related concepts, or the symbols to use, right, to perform their mathematical calculations. For example, they can get confused between the addition and subtraction, multiplication and division. So probably they have, when it's difficult for them to understand the mathematical concept, mathematical reasoning, what more to perform the calculations. So sometimes it's difficult for them to actually do that and then get confused. Sometimes they think multiplication is an addition, or addition is division, or division subtraction. So things like that, probably they don't know why or how it's being used in a problem. So that can be that can be one of the symptoms of dyscalculia as well. All right. And then difficulty in number sense, memorizing math facts, math calculations, math reasoning, and math problem solving. So dyscalculia referring to mostly math related issues. So number related issues, not understanding why certain things have to be this way. For example, multiplication. So not understanding why multiplication has to be used in this problem, or doing the calculations itself. Why does this number plus this number equals to this number and not this number, when you say this number is this number? So probably that is in terms of understanding mathematics, and also especially the difference between when you subtract on the hours, like for example 2 hours 2 hours 3 minutes minus with 1 hour 50 seconds. So that is different. You can't just simply borrow one from here and just put here. So that multiplication, that's a mathematical concept that one is difficult for them to grasp, rather than the normal subtraction that we normally do. You can just borrow from the other numbers on the 10th. So that is what is sometimes difficult for them to grasp and understand. And sometimes understanding the facts of 1 minute equals to 60 seconds, 1 day equals to 24 hours, that can be a difficulty for them as well. So anything that is related to numbers especially, and it's a really prominent difficulties for them, then that might be under dyscalculia. All right. And then next one, we'll go under dysgraphia. So I understand that not many people are aware of dysgraphia, but dysgraphia is also the characteristics of SLD. So dysgraphia is related to difficulties putting one thoughts onto people, or we could say written expression. So when you have ideas, especially on essays, so when you want to write essays, you have to come with ideas. So that ideas, you have to elaborate those ideas into several sentences to make it relating to one sentence to the other. So people or children with dysgraphia might have difficulty putting that on paper. Probably they know what to say, but they don't know how to organize the structure to make it a proper sentence structure. Probably having difficulty elaborating the idea itself. Okay, for example, if I would say, okay, write about your family. So not knowing what to write, where to start. So despite having to guide, okay, maybe you can write this. Yes, they know what to write. You have given the points, but how to actually elaborate those sentences, how to actually combine those sentences, making a story out of it. So that can be a difficulty in terms of dysgraphia. Then again, I would always want the audience to understand that if this is a difficulty, it has to be a prominent difficulty, not just lack of exposure, lack of understanding, lack of guidance. So it has to be a prominent characteristic or prominent issues throughout the learning process. All right. So dysgraphia also shows difficulties with spelling, grammar, punctuation, and handwriting. So probably for their handwriting, they miss out some spaces, or they miss out all of the spaces. So instead of having I space like space to space eat, and they will say I like to eat in one word. Instead of sentence, is a word, because there's no spaces in between them. So that can be a difficulty for people to actually read, and for people to understand what was written. So it is actually a word rather than a multiple of word, rather than a sentence being written there on a piece of paper. So grammar wise, like I said just now, instead of I want to go to the toilet, it says I toilet, or I go, or things like that. So spelling, like for example, I did mention just now, if you want to write kucing, is KCNIG, things like that. So instead of KUCING. So those are the things that is very prominent in people who have dysgraphia, which is on the written expression alone. So that is dysgraphia.
Yep. So for this graph here, it is something that it's I personally experience, and it can be a bit complicated. Okay, because when a child presented with the characteristics of dysgraphia, there's few therapies that it can be closely related. Okay, and if those parents or teachers or anyone that's familiar with speech therapies, they do have this term called aphasia. So it's
Right.
almost similar as dysgraphia, but it's not translated in terms of writing. So in aphasia, by speech and language therapists, it's a similar thing where the child has difficulty putting one thoughts together. So they are unable to put sentences in a proper way, like I ice cream one or one ice cream I. Okay, but so it's very closely related. It can be quite complicated sometimes,
Right.
and we don't always see straight to dysgraphia because also another um, uh, professional that deal with this is occupational therapist.
Mhm.
When a child has difficulty writing and spelling, okay, it's mostly closely related to fine motor skill, and then it might affect the executive functioning.
Mhm.
This is where OT will see it as a executive functioning difficulty, whereby the child has difficulty comprehend input. The input and the output is mismatched. Okay, so there's a lot of factors behind it. So when it comes to dysgraphia, we hardly hear about it, and it's really important that parents are aware of this dysgraphia, because it might look very simple at first, like, oh, okay, it's just growing up and whatnot. But if you're really worried, talk to the teachers first, because they see your child every day, and you can look at the performance. And same goes to dyscalculia, because normally when we talk about learning difficulties, the first thing, the biggest thing, we even have a persatuan here in Malaysia. And one of the biggest persatuan is called Persatuan Dyslexia Malaysia, PDM. So if you're worried, uh, you just want to get more information about your child, you can go to that one before you see any more, because you cannot decide who to go. You're not sure if your child, or you a bit reluctant to see a doctor or a clinical psychologist. You can just pop up to Persatuan Dyslexia to check out information about dyslexia. Okay, it's quite big, Persatuan, and they have a lot of branches around Malaysia. But yes, when we talk about SLD, like Miss Liana said, there's three types. Okay, the biggest, the most discussed is dyslexia. But we, from time to time, we have children who have difficulties as well, not only dyslexia. It can be mathematical reasoning. So when it comes to mathematical reasoning, it might at first seem like the child has a problem with reasoning in general. And then when you look at the work, school performance, then you get to go in depth and find out that they have difficulty processing mathematical reasoning. So in general, if a child has a difficulty in mathematical reasoning, they might have difficulty with cause and effect. Like if it were to happen, if you're given this child in a situation like raining, what do you need? An umbrella. But the child might don't get that concept. So this is something that is not widely discussed in Malaysia. So that's why we have this talk or this workshop to spread the awareness to all the Malaysians out there who attend to this. Because it's really important that someone, sometime, even us, even me, I'm not sure about Liana, sometimes I will tend to overlook this calculator. I personally have few cases on this calculator, but at first I overlook it as like, oh, the child might have processing difficulty, okay, unable to pick up, and then the output is different, and it's just mathematics. But after observations and gone through with the doctors back and forth. Then dyscalculia come out. Then we were like, yes. So because it's something that sometimes me working with parents, I do tend to overlook. So it's very important for parents to know the types. Okay, same goes to dysgraphia. It's hardly talked about, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Because in my opinion, uh, dysgraphia and dyscalculia is equally as important as dyslexia. I have yet to see a comorbid or a two SLD together. Maybe
Right.
dysgraphia and dyscalculia together. We never know because I've seen a child who has dyslexia, but also perform quite poorly in mathematics, but we can't identify the dyscalculia part. So this is the importance of sharing SLD because it's something that it's not widely discussed and the information available outside it's not so much other than dyslexia. Normally, if you don't talk to a doctor or a clinical psychologist or teachers that have experience, in general, we will all jump, including me myself. Sometimes we will jump straight to, oh, dyslexia. But we forgot that, dyslexia is also under SLD. Under SLD means under specific learning difficulties, means they have different types of characteristic that has to be met. Sometimes, yeah, this is when we talk about SLD, sometimes one thing that parents have to know is we have to be patient when we're dealing with children that have or adults that have SLD, because it's just not one session or one sitting we can know it all. The assessment require time. We require to discuss with the doctors, the parents, the teachers to identify before we can uh, uh, say that oh this child is clinically diagnosed. Okay, then only we confirm, or else we just say that there is a possibility or there's a probability that this child might have this. But also, why is it important? Because when we send the child back, that's where the professionals, the health professionals, like Miss Liana, can come up with a strategy. If a child has difficulty in learning, the traditional way will definitely won't work. Hence, that's why the child has learning difficulty. So a lot of teaching in education, they do it the traditional way, which the child is not able to continue or follow through. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Charlie. And it's interesting where you mentioned aphasia. So that's one of the neurological disorders as well. So
Correct.
so when that's why, like Charlie said, it's not easy to identify SLDs just based on background check. Sometimes we need the parents to actually go through several sessions with the doctors as well, just to rule out whether there is no problem with like aphasias and whatnot, so Broca's aphasias and whatnot. So that is difficult for them sometimes for parents because they want to know it now and then and to get it diagnosed as soon as possible. We understand that that is one of the main concerns, which is to get the diagnosis done because they want to get intervention being done early. But however, we do not want to overdiagnose for something that is not on its situation or condition. So
Correct.
that's why we need to actually rule out the things that we might think that it is a possibility for the child to have. And then after ruling out, then we can see that, okay, this is psychological. So this is where we look at. So every single time when when parents come to me, I would always ask for one, the teacher's report. What did the teacher say for the child's academic performance? And then have you gone through any speech therapy sessions just to rule out the features, or if not, have you gone through the doctors, your pediatrician, to see whether if it is a brain functionality problem. So those are the things that we need to go one by one to rule out. So that's why sometimes it takes longer sessions to rule out rather than, okay, you have this in this, let's do an assessment and that's it. Yeah, you have the characters of SLD. Because we don't want to overdiagnose. When we overdiagnose, that is not the main problem. The main problem is elsewhere. So we want to get direct to the root of the cause rather than going here and there. And then apparently it's not dysgraphia, it's not dyslexia, it's not dyscalculia, it's something else.
Yeah.
So that's why it's very important for us to go through one by one to get check and to rule out what are the possibilities other than the characters of SLDs. So that's why with the last characteristics of SLDs is not prominent to other condition, especially the medical condition. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I do experience overdiagnosis as well, where when the intervention is out, it's defeating the purpose. It's countering the child's condition because its diagnosis been like this. So intervention is tailored, made, or recommended based on the diagnosis, but then it doesn't work on the child. It's counter-effective. So it's really defeating the purpose. So I would say that speech learning disability or disorder, it's still new, although it's about like 10, 15 years, but it's still somewhat new in terms of Malaysian context. And a lot of specialists out there are also not very well versed with SLD because like what Liana mentioned in the beginning of the what do you call this? Beginning of the talk, where we might see, oh, my child is just lazy, like any other typical kids, growing like this. I give him a smack, then he will back. Or I just send to OT, or I just send to, yes, OT or speech do help in a certain way, but there's also other intervention that can be, especially the relationship between a clinical psychologist and teachers, because teachers are trained to teach. They have a lot of strategies, but they're just not sure which. So based on what is suggested by the clinical psychologists based on the diagnosis, and then the teachers can somewhat modify the way of they execute the learning. So just like any other health professional, like OT, we have protocol. First do this, do that, do three. And then clinical psychologists as well, counselors have it as well. Teachers has it as well. The instruction, the ordering of teaching, they have to change based on the child. So that's where we have to work closely with the teachers because, like, to be honest, I'm not very good in teaching academics. So if I were to given this intervention or suggestion based on teaching, I couldn't execute as well because I'm not from academic background. So that's why it's very important, like not to overdiagnose, because I've seen some cases where we've been doing for months, some even years, and why is the child is regressing. To be honest, it's regressing. It's not what I expect. The child stagnant, yes, I understand, but regressing is something that is, for me, it's the worst nightmare. Because to be honest, it's like, we've been doing so much, we've been going back and forth, like what Liana said, talk to this clinical psychologist, go to the other clinical psychologist for second opinion, go to this pediatrician, go to that psychiatrist, back and forth, go to Persatuan Dyslexia, and then, and we've done so much, but the child is regressing. Then this is where we have to go back to the drawing board and start again. Like, what actually is happening here? Like, it's very interesting to share this kind of experience. I bet a lot of parents have seen this as well, but it's just that something that is not very popular as compared to other neurological disorder like autism. Wow, one of the biggest, cerebral palsy, one of the biggest group of disability group in whole world. Okay, autism is a big thing in Malaysia, ADHD is a big thing as well, but sometimes we might overlook specific learning disorder. So the screening system from schools, that's why, like what Miss Liana kept pinpointing, talk to the school, talk to the teacher that's teaching, because this information is really important for those professionals that are going to diagnose your child with.
Right. Thank you so much, Harry, for sharing that experience.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's continue on the next slide. Okay. Um, so when we talk about characteristics of SLD, we mentioned on the early of the workshop is that it impacts mainly on the academic performance. So some of the things that we look at is the inaccuracy or slow and effortful reading, poor written expression and lacks clarity. Like they write something, or they write certain sentences, but you don't actually understand what the sentences wants or what the sentences means. So that's one of it. And then difficulties in remembering number facts or inaccurate mathematical reasoning, and basically on the overall poor academic performance. So those are the impact on the academic performance itself. So we haven't looked at the bigger picture of the impact of if you don't diagnose your child SLD, right? Because this is mainly on the academic performance that we looked at. So if your child having all these characteristics and you think that it is similar or it is synchronized throughout the formal education phase, so maybe that is where you want to get your child screened for any characteristic of SLDs, just to help your child to get the best learning outcome that they can give. When we talk about children who have SLDs, a lot of misconception from parents, because it's not easy for them to actually acknowledge that their child has difficulty regardless of whatever difficulties that is, ASD, ADHD, SLDs, IDs. So it is difficult for them to go through, but with proper strategies, proper interventions, there can be a fruitful outcome from not knowing certain things to at least be able to do certain things, from not being independent to actually be independent on certain things. So that's why it's important for you to acknowledge all these difficulties, right? Right. So like I said just now, so what happened if SLD is not acknowledged? So it is difficult for parents to actually accept SLDs, because fearing that people who has the child who have SLD might not be able to work or might not be able to have a proper job because they can't pass through primary school, secondary school, or tertiary education. So that is some of the concerns that's been raised from parents that I've met. But if you do not acknowledge that your child has characteristic of SLDs, it's going to be more difficult for them. Why? Because if it's not recognized, it's not going to be managed. So if not going to be managed, there's going to be problems throughout the child's or the person's life. So it has to be beyond the academic achievement. So academic performance, for example, if they have difficulty in mathematics, means that they have difficulties in terms of budgeting their time, budgeting their financial budget, estimate a certain time that they need to get ready and things like that. So those are the issues beyond the academic achievement itself. So that could lead to psychological issues, which is anxiety. They could reach to depression, because not being able to do things that normal people or typical people would do. But why can't I do this? Is simple mathematics. Why can't I understand? This is simple reading. Why can't I understand the simple instructions? So this all could lead to poor mental health issues, and not knowing or not being able to identify early in the education phase, education level, that could cause all these symptoms, depression, anxiety, all the symptoms, psychological symptoms in the future. So that is where it's difficult for them to actually manage their own life, just because certain parents are afraid to actually acknowledge that there are difficulties for their children in terms of their academic performance or achievements. All right. So with this also could lead to dropping out of school, because not wanting or not knowing how to get a better strategy in learning process. So when they are not given the opportunity to learn with the right strategy, they will lose interest. So despite that that subject is being easy or whatnot, because they have difficulty in terms of learning. So are they expected to learn when they have difficulties with it? So when there's lose interest, they're gonna be uh, showing that in their behaviors, they're gonna drop out of school, they're gonna do things that are beyond, and then we're gonna see that they have behavior issues. But actually, the behaviors are being root to something else. So that's why it's important for parents or people around you to actually acknowledge whether, regardless if it's SLD, any disorders that you have, if you've seen in your children, you need to diagnose as soon as possible. Sometimes it can be seen, sometimes it's difficult for you to see during the primary. If you notice within the secondary school, even if there's something wrong, please get diagnosed or get a screening, just to make sure that your child is getting the appropriate treatment, appropriate strategy, appropriate learning processes throughout.
Yep. So this one I would like to share to parents or teachers who attend our workshop today. For those futures who are going to watch this video, it's available in Facebook. One thing I want to let parents and teachers or whoever was working or have children with SLD or any types of disability, there's always one thing that parents share, that they miss the golden time. To be honest, for me as a counselor, I will tell parents it's okay. If you miss the golden time, that doesn't mean that your child cannot be helped. Okay, because some of the things that we are not exposed to, for example, SLD, I wouldn't know my child until from 5 p.m. Then I know, but it's never too late. Okay, so do not blame yourself. Do not say that, oh, I'm a failure, I cannot take it. And that's why these are the things that I've experienced a lot. When parents come in, they find it very hard during the counseling session. They find it very hard to accept. They'll be like, if my child is blind, I can understand. If my child is mute, I can understand. If my child has ASD, I understand. So these show that the gap of information is missing. Okay, because information is not widely available, hence it's normal. As a person, you feel anxious. Okay, flight or fight. Okay, your body decided to run away or fight. So when you fight, you just cannot accept that. But parents or teachers or anyone out there, please do not feel anxious or feel sad or feel like negative, because only now you know that your child has difficulty. It's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's just that the information is not readily available. Try not to blame uh, yourself or others. There's always a way to help as long as you reach out. Okay, I know it's easier for me to say, but as long as you reach out, like to to someone to share about your difficulties, that way it can have and things can be done. Uh, intervention can be introduced and work on how to improve the child's condition. Okay, so this is where a lot of parents come to me and say, "Oh, I missed the golden point. I should have done this in earlier times." No, it's just that some things might not available in Malaysia yet. Okay, like if you compare Western countries to here, they have their education system. I'm not saying Malaysian education is bad, but they implement a screening for children at very young age. It make it compulsory, so they are able to detect. But some might might not be able to detect too. But it's in Malaysia because it's not widely available. So, and some of other difficulties like SLD is some. If your child is not in learning setting, you wouldn't know your child has SLD. So, uh, so parents, please don't blame yourself if you receive the diagnosis or you notice that your child is only about 17, then you know. But it's as long as you reach out. Okay, like what Miss Liana said, one of the biggest thing that I found out when I'm working with family, is the gap of receiving intervention is huge in Malaysia. Okay, it's normal because of our culture, how we grow up. We don't really talk things to other people. Like, my family, I readily talk it within my family. And then also we turn to a lot of people. We talk to the spiritual leader. It's not that it's not good. Okay, it's just that we turn to something that we were familiar with, something that we grow up with. Because to be honest, in a movie, if you see a movie, a clinical psychologist or counselor, they call it a shrink. Basically you just go there and then lie down there and start talking. So the way they portray us mental health professional is uh, which was received negatively in Malaysia, but actually it's not. Some people might say, "Oh, you go see Charlie, or you go see Liana. Something wrong with you, right? You mentally not stable." So no, it's not that. It's just that we are trained to help people with mental difficulties. Okay, some of the things that Liana mentioned is like depression, anxiety. It can manifest from SLD. So manifestation can start from there, and then yes, things become complicated. But if you are willing to seek help, then yes, we can definitely find a way to help. Okay, so when parents are reluctant to go out and seek help, that's where the gap of receiving intervention becomes bigger and bigger. So by the time the child has reached to me or Miss Liana, it's already in a condition where we have to have some intensive session or intensive therapy, which can affect in terms of financial, the caregiver stress will increase. Because you have to budget, like what Ms. Liana said, you have to budget the logistics, you have to budget your time, you have to budget financial, it becomes expensive. But that doesn't mean there's no uh, way of dealing. There is always a way. Okay, it's just that as long as you talk to the right person or gain as much as information as possible, because information is power. So no, and also accepting your child, regardless of what the diagnosis is going to be. I know it's not easy, but it takes time. So that's why you have us to here to support the parents. Okay, when this is the second thing that I found when parents uh, have difficulty to accept their child, that's where it affects the child from receiving intervention as well. So information and acceptance level, it goes hand in hand. Okay, if your acceptance level is quite low, that makes you quite reluctant to go out and seek help. It's like, oh, my friend gonna be laughing at me, my yeah, it's just something that is hardly talked about, and stigma. Yeah, some of them refuse to get diagnosis is because a stigma, like a label. I mean, to be honest, or not to be rude, but if you go out with your child, you won't be having a big tag saying that your child is an SLD. So is a child with SLD. You don't need to tell anyone about it. You can just go out with your child and continue life. That's my opinion, though. So uh, diagnosis is something that provides other health professionals to have a direction on what to do. So sometimes I told parents if it's difficult to accept the diagnosis, why not we accept the intervention first? And then we slowly work on her the diagnosis. Yes, my child has autism. Okay, and I cannot accept. All right. So can you accept the intervention first? Why not we go OT first? So and we work on while the child receiving intervention, then we work on your acceptance level. The most important thing is if you're unable to accept the diagnosis, please do accept the intervention or recommendation. Uh, at least uh, one step at a time. There might be a lot of recommendation, but pick one and start working on it. You might not like the diagnosis. Uh, it's the parent's choice. I understand. I cannot force you to accept or whatever Miss Liana have said, but she have suggested something how to help. So why not we divert a bit of that attention to focus on intervention, and we live in here and now. I mean, we don't want to dwell in the past. If we dwell in the past, it's very, very hard for us to move forward and receive intervention. Normally this is what I tell parents. Diagnosis, you can put it aside, but recommendation, no. Yeah, you might not like whatever what Miss Liana said, it's okay, but we work on what we can do to help the child. So yeah, this is because of a lot of parents talk about stigma, and yes, our community is not acceptable. But yeah, this is the things that we somehow have to learn. Okay, in my opinion, we learn faster than a child if the child is confirmed to have a disability. For us, changing is definitely faster than a child. So why not we change for the child and help support them instead of expecting them to change to what our expectation is. So we have to meet eye to eye, our expectation and the child's ability. If we don't achieve that, then it will always be unbalanced. There's always something that you are not satisfied with yourself or with the child or with the diagnosis. Okay, it's the same thing as diagnosis and recommendation. We have to find the balance. Okay, you don't like the diagnosis, let's focus on the intervention. Okay, and then this is how we can help. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Yep.
You're welcome.
So moving on, is what Charlie is an extension for what Charlie said, is like, how do I help if my child has a characteristics of all these, right? So aside from going for screening or diagnosis, let's say yeah, like Charlie said, if you don't want to get your child diagnosed, or after if you get your child diagnosed, how do I go further from that? So some of the recommendations that we can give is that is early intervention. So in early intervention program, children are being identified what are their root problem is. Let's say if they have difficulty in terms of reading, so how do the multidisciplinary mental providers can help in terms of helping them strategizing what is needed for that children. So that is where we call the individualized education plan. So individualized education plan, or we call it IEP, is basically we cater for the need of an individual child. So let's say if the child has difficulty in reading, so which part of reading, how do we improve that reading or mathematical concepts or writing? So that is where we try to plan out, to channel out what is needed for the individual child. So as compared to a bigger classroom or a mainstream classroom, there's no individualized education plan. It's more to generalize education plans where it's being one system or one teaching technique is being taught to many children. So sometimes when children who has difficulties in understanding or learning at their own pace, not as fast as other children, they have difficulties in understanding because the system itself is too fast for the child to cope. So that's why sometimes for children who have SLDs, we would better comprehend with the individualized education plan for them to better know how to help the child itself. So in this technique itself, there's not only involving one teacher, but usually we involve other multidisciplinary actions as well. All right. So, for example, speech therapies, occupational therapies, special education needs, right? So those are, or sometimes the clinical psychologists to oversee the psychological factors of the child itself. So we need to have this multidisciplinary team to actually foresee or help the children itself in terms of our IEP. So if you already registered your child for the early intervention program, make sure that your child has the IEP plan, IEP planned out for your child. You need to know what is being taught for your child, not just letting go of the school to do what is needed, but not knowing what is being taught. Why? Because if the teachers are teaching a certain strategy in the classroom, you need to know that strategy to be applied at home as well. All right. So if you are trying to apply other techniques that's being taught in the program, so the child's going to get confused. My therapist or my teacher actually taught this way, but you're teaching this way. And then somehow you get frustrated because your child does not understand the way you teach because they learn other techniques, right? So that's why it's important for you to actually know what are the strategy and how it's being used and how to apply it at home. All right. And then secondly, how you can help is maybe you can involve multimodal teaching, which is you use multiple senses, not only visual visual skills, but you use auditory skills, probably you use kinesthetic skills. So all those senses that you need to have to engage them to understand in the things that is being taught to them. All right. And then probably if for those who have children diagnosed with SLDs, but in the mainstream school, what you can do is probably you can ask for additional time on tests and written assignments. Sometimes that's going to be helpful for the children because they have difficulty. They have to put a lot of effort in terms of reading, understanding, and writing what was understood and elaborate the sentences. Sometimes they have difficulty in terms of managing the time limit that they've given. Probably need more time to do it. They have the ideas, they're capable of doing it, but they have difficulties doing it as fast as other children. So that's why you can apply or you can ask the teachers or the school if your child could have an additional time on tests or exams and whatnot. All right. And sometimes if the fine motor skills is interrupted, like for example, like when I say this dyslexia or any of these characters, they have fine motor skills issues. So writing can be tiring for them. Writing can be difficult for them. Probably the B's and D's and whatnot, it's difficult for them to identify and to write them in a proper sentences. When writing is a difficulties, probably you can opt for computers or for typing. Sometimes they type faster because they know where to type. They don't have to see each and individual characters, but they already know where the position of each letters on the keyboard, so they just type easily. All right. And then instead of going on a bigger classroom, probably you can go for one-to-one support or smaller size classroom, right? So early intervention program for children who is second before primary or mid-primary, they have classes for them, but it's smaller class for them to go one-to-one or 2-3 teachers in 10 students, for example. So it's smaller size as compared to the general mainstream classes, which is we have like 35 to 40 students to 1 teacher's alone. All right. And then what you can do at home is always use repetition and be patient, because that's why it's important for you to understand the characteristics of SLDs. When you understand the characteristics of SLDs, you know that they have difficulties in certain aspects. So you need to be patient and use repetition to teach certain things. So be patient in repeating whatever that you want your child to learn. It's okay for you to repeat as long as the child is being able to grasp and child is could remember or help them to remember what is being needed to do. And then lastly, instead of scolding or punishing your child because not being able to do up to your standard, what you can do is understand them and give frequent praises, rewards, and encouragement. It's okay if you can't do this. I just want you to do your best. Or if it's okay for you to make mistakes, let's try not to make mistakes on the other one, on the next task or things like that. So always give encouragement instead of, oh yeah, is this what you can do? Or, why can't you remember all the things I just taught you? So instead of giving those harsh commands or punishments, try and give rewards and compliments for them, because every little step that they took is an effort that they did. They actually, from not being able to they at least trying to do something, that's where the step that is supposed to be complimented. Congratulations, well done, good job, next time you can do better. So things like that is very important to encourage them to learn. We don't want them to stop learning just because they don't understand. We want them to keep on practicing, keep on learning, keep on trying to do things so that they can get more, they can learn more things rather than just giving up on the middle of learning things. All right, so I think, I think that's the end of my slides. So thank you very much.
Okay, we have a question.
Right.
Who should actually design IEP for SLP child? Or SLP?
Who is, sorry, what was it?
Who should actually design IEP for, I think it's SLD child?
Okay, so who should design the IEP plan, is it?
Yes.
Okay, so that is for teachers who have certificate in special needs. So special needs teachers, they should know on how to know where to target, but also they involve multidisciplinary team, like I mentioned just now. Probably the teaching method is from the teachers, but other, like for example, fine motor skills on the OTs, psychological in terms of the psychological aspect in terms of their self-esteem, self-confidence, and so on and so forth. So basically, all of us in the multidisciplinary team should be able to plan the IEP for the child.
Yep. Yep. And also normally if normally the teachers will do it in the
Yep.
teaching part,
Yep.
and then we also if here in Mind Story we do modify based on each of the therapies that involve. So it requires different types of uh, 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 what do you call this? Professional. It also depending on what the IEP is used for. Okay, let's say in this condition is SLD, speech, I mean not speech, but it's a specific learning difficulty. Then yes, those who involve, they can contribute to the IEP. So everyone working with the child are on the same page, or else I have I might introduce something that is different from Miss Liana, and then end up we both arguing what is the best. And then the child, while waiting for the intervention, because we have not done with our IEP, the child has to postpone and wait for the IEP to be done. Then only intervention can be carried out. So in this case, it's SLD. Then yes, those who relevant therapists and teachers recommendedly. I know some of the school they tend to do because existing school they have their own system. We don't want to interrupt the system from the school. So what we can do is we work together with the school and come up with an IEP. Okay, so as long as it's relevant, the child receiving any types of intervention, it will be benefiting to have the therapist or the professional work together to design the IEP. So it's quite consistent across different settings, be it at home, at center, or at school. Everyone will have a copy of IEP. So although it's named individual education plan, but it can apply outside of education as well. So this is like a sort of like a report book or a goal for the child. So any more questions from parents? So yeah, if no, then yeah, some of those who attend our monthly workshop or monthly awareness talk. If you don't have a question or you can't think of a question right now, feel free to comment on the video. You can find this video attached in our Facebook page. So, when you rewatch this video, if you have any question, feel free to comment there and we'll try to reply. Thank you so much, Ms. Liana, for attending our workshop today.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, not attending, but as a guest today, our workshop today. And thank you everyone that joined us today in this evening. So everyone have a good day. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.